Forum. All right. And I got somebody else coming over here. They're still coming in. This is one of the series of feminist forums we have had that started when COVID hit. We were going to have a national conference, and that had to be canceled, and we just started using our speakers for events. And it's just been a really great, fascinating experience, lots of great speakers and discussion. These events are interactive, so we encourage people at the end of the presentations to ask questions. There's two ways we can do it. One is on the reactions thing on the bottom, there's a little thing that looks like a hand. I think that works as a hand raising. Or you can put your questions in chat, and we can have the speakers respond. So with no further ado, I want to introduce, let me start with Carol. Carol F. is a detransition lesbian and a detrans advocate and a co-founder of detransvoices.org. Welcome, Carol.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. So yeah, my name's Carol. I co-founded Detrans Voices. Basically, Detrans Voices is a kind of a resource, a website with a lot of resources for detransitioning people. When I started detransitioning 2 years ago, I found that there really was no support and no resources for us at all. So we kind of came up with the idea to kind of have a central location of like a website where people can go and get connected with, you know, other detransitioners and resources and therapists and stuff like that. So, so a little bit about my story. I started transitioning at 34. And I lived as a trans man for 4 years. I injected testosterone every 2 weeks for those 4 years. I had a double mastectomy, and I began detransitioning about 2 years ago. I, however, was first introduced to trans ideology in my very early 20s when I first came out as a lesbian in the community, which would have been around 2001. And at that time, where I live in California, it seemed very quickly, all of my peers, all the other butch women and lesbians I was hanging out with at the time suddenly the butch women especially started to identify as trans men. And that's kind of how I got introduced to it really early in my life. And I really felt that label or that description of what a trans man was fit me. So I started to identify as a trans man back then. I did try to transition back in the early 2000s, but gatekeeping was a bit more strict and I couldn't jump through the hoops needed. So I kind of left that. I was angry that I couldn't transition. So I left that behind, but I never left it behind in my head. So when in my early 30s, I had a lot of horrible life events that happened and I just really spiraled, and I really thought that transition was the answer why my life was so messed up for so long. And I did that, and I found out 4 years into it that that was a mistake, and my problems were still here, still very present, and transition was a bandage at best. So that's kind of my story summarized, and I'm sure we'll probably get into more detail as we go on.
Okay, do you want to move on then?
Sure.
Yes, so Rachel. Rachel is a 30-year-old lesbian, detransitioned 3 years ago after living as a trans man for 5 years.
Yes, my name is Rachel. I'm so used to these meetings where I have to say my name and then my pronouns, so thank you for that. This is really refreshing. And I lived as a trans man for a little over 5 years. And I started transitioning when I was about 21. I first came into contact with the idea of transition as like a real concept after coming out as a lesbian. I actually met a trans woman on a blind date who did not disclose that he was a man. And he coerced and kind of talked me into the idea that maybe I wasn't a woman because I was attracted to women and I had all of these internalized homophobic ideas regarding gender and sexual orientation that I was really struggling with. I was raised in a fundamentalist Christian household, so the concept of living my life as an out and proud lesbian was never something I thought I could achieve. So I gravitated a lot more towards the idea of transitioning because I thought, well, better to be a man with a woman than a woman with a woman, which I now view as an incredible insult to myself and to others. After transitioning socially, I started taking testosterone. I was on an incredibly high dose, even compared to others at the time. For me, the process was exceptionally easy. I have a history of severe mental illness, including psychosis. I have a history of sexual abuse as well as eating disorder. None of those were regarded as things that should have halted my transition process, which looking back, it really should have. So instead of addressing those issues, I continued on the path of transition. And I fortunately did not go down the path of having surgeries, but I did take testosterone for 5.5 years until my kidneys and liver began to shut down. And my health in general declined to a point where I was forced to stop testosterone. And that was about almost 4 years ago. And that's when I started to transition medically and then, or detransition medically. And then that's when I also started to consider detransition socially. I chose to detransition altogether once I realized that the reaction I was getting from my transgender friends at the time was so aggressive and the group think was so thick that it really related itself to me like a cult. And I felt like I was leaving a cult. So that's a little bit about my story. Right now, I don't work for any sites. I don't write for anybody right now, but I have written a couple of things that I'm hoping to publish soon. I'm on Twitter as at habituallyfem, and I've done a couple of interviews.
Thank you. Thank you, Rachel. Sydney. Sydney is a 20-year-old who transitioned medically as a child. Okay,
Hi. As she said, I'm Sydney, and as you guys can tell, I'm not showing my face here, and it's because I'm still in college right now. It wouldn't really be safe for me to do so. My story started when I was around 14. I transitioned medically, socially, legally from about 14 to 18 is the years. I had a supportive family, but I experienced and internalized a lot of homophobia and misogyny sort of indirectly. And it played into me thinking that transition was really my only option as a young girl who was deeply disturbed by puberty, was depressed due to other things. And it did help me at the moment, but it was because it was literally the only option I and everyone else believed in. And my parents enabled it because they were told that if I didn't transition, I would kill myself. It was something that I believed. It was something that doctors believed. It was something that my parents then had to believe. Now, upon turning 18, a little bit before that, my dysphoria actually desisted, which is the medical term for it just went away. At the time, I felt like I was going insane because no one ever talks about that even being a possibility. However, doing a little bit of research, studies have shown that especially with minors as they grow up, this is something that happens. And I had to actually weigh whether I wanted to just stay transitioned and not rock the boat or to just go through with detransition. And as you can see, I chose to detransition mainly actually for health reasons. That became more apparent after I detransitioned, but I was worried. A common thing when you're transitioning with taking testosterone is people tell you you need a hysterectomy in like 5 years. Otherwise, you'll get cancer, which that's never really fully addressed. But I was kind of nearing that 5-year mark. So I was like, all right, let's get off. But then my family history of hypothyroidism cropped up, and it kind of reinforced that that was not something I should stick with just for health reasons. And I had actually gone through all of the red tape due to being a minor. I had a bad experience with my endocrinologist towards the end of that, which I might expand on more later. But he also never acknowledged when my family turned out to have an intense history of endocrine disorder. So for me, a lot of my problems have been with just medical neglect. But now I'm 20 and I'm doing pretty well. I'm not involved with any detransition advocacy aside from speaking occasionally with people like this. But due to where I am in my life right now, it's a bit too dangerous for me to do anything else.
Okay, so I think we just touched the surface here. Why don't I kick it off, and then we can have a really interactive discussion.
Is it possible to ask a question, or should we wait?
Yeah, why don't people are still coming in. Yes, why don't, I was gonna ask something first, and then why people can, I think you can just, you can put your hand up in the I think you can put your hand up on the reactions thing. I think that'll work. Am I right, Rebecca? Will that work?
Yes, that should work.
Okay, so we're both gonna, Rebecca, if you can help me, because I may not miss somebody, we'll just call on folks. I just wanted to start off though with I'm hearing a common theme, and I've heard a common theme about homophobia and people growing up in religious families in particular, but it's just in society generally. Internalized homophobia, having problems accepting oneself as a lesbian, and also the misogyny in the society and the male violence and the traumas that young women and girls experience as themes. So I guess I wanted to ask first how that played a role in your decision to transition initially, if it did. So do we want to like go around, or does somebody want to just, of the speakers, just pipe in?
Rachel, Sydney?
I can go.
Okay.
So yeah, as I kind of mentioned briefly, I grew up in a very religious household. Gender roles were strictly enforced. And in addition to that, homophobia was extremely present. I actually was kicked out when I was 17 because my father found out that I was with a woman. So it was always something that was kind of embedded into my mind as a bad thing. And that coupled with like you mentioned, and the misogyny in the world and the male violence out there, I just wanted so badly to conform. I wanted so badly to not have to face the conflict that being who I truly am would actually mean. So I tried very, very hard to be heterosexual. I ended up in numerous, mostly bad relationships with men where I was not happy. And it was very, very difficult for me to accept that I was a lesbian. And I didn't have any negative feelings towards others being, gay or lesbian. That wasn't something I projected onto anyone else. It really truly was a standard that I felt I had to hold for myself. And I think that that really fits very well into the transgender ideology, because the whole notion of transgender ideology is change yourself to fit into the world. So you know, you go through the process of I can't possibly be in a same-sex relationship, so I'm going to change my sex. Um, and that's really what kind of hit close to home for me, that and feeling like I didn't have any I didn't have any butch role models in my life. I didn't see any women who were breaking the boundaries of, you know, gender roles and gender stereotypes really in my personal life. So I really felt like the only way that I could live outside of that little box of femininity was to transition and be regarded as male instead of just living as a woman with, you know, the presentation that I have.
Carol, did you want to say
Yep.
anything?
Sure. Yeah, it is definitely a common theme. I don't think I've met a detransition woman who hasn't had similar experiences. Um, I was similar. I was raised from ages 4 to 9 in a very religious, like evangelical Christian household that was very misogynistic. I was really raised to believe that women were there to serve men, and it was the kind of household where I couldn't cut my hair, I couldn't wear pants, I had to wear dresses. Women didn't wear makeup, which that's fine. But you know, just you really had to conform to this, you know, particular standard. And even though the really strict religious part kind of stopped at 9 when my mother divorced my stepdad, he was kind of the leader of that idea. She still was always very religious and very homophobic. And from a very young age, I'm thinking probably 8 or 9 or younger, I was bullied quite a bit by my mother for not acting like a girl enough. She would tell me that I didn't walk like a girl, that I walked like a boy, and I needed to change that. And as a kid, I really didn't understand how you exactly change that. But I really got the impression that who I was not acceptable. So um, as I got older, that just kind of stuck with me. And then once I realized that I was same-sex attracted at around, you know, 16, especially, I really was like, okay, this is definitely a thing. I, you know, just kind of freaked out. I didn't know what to do with that. I eventually kind of came around and accepted it by the time I was 20 or 21. And then when I came out to my mother, I got pretty much kicked out of the house. The friend group I was running with at the time really rejected me as a lesbian. They didn't want anything to do with me. So I kind of lost a huge friend group. I lost a lot of family. I was told I couldn't go to family events because my grandfather didn't want a dyke around the kids. So that was a lot of early trauma around being gay, you know, and also being a butch woman was definitely not something acceptable. I mean, I would get shit from strangers all the time. I would get harassed at work by people who would come in, by mostly men who would come in. I worked in customer service, so you know, come into a store I was working at, and I'd get ridiculed, or I'd get made fun of, I'd get intimidated. And so that really left me scared, I think, to be a woman in society and a butch woman in society. And so a lot of the reason I transitioned was just to escape that, because it was so hard to live that way, you know, and sometimes it's the little tiny things that happen a lot that just really drain you, like, you know, going to the store and getting sideways looks, or, you know, having, you know, cashiers just be kind of rude to you, or, you know, just that, you know, getting disgusting looks in the bathrooms. It's just, it really, it's hard. It's hard to be a gender nonconforming woman in our society. And yeah, that's a big reason why I transitioned. And then, but I realized into it that was a reason I transitioned. And so I was like, okay, well, that's not all right. I gotta stop this. But yeah, definitely similar things.
let's see. Was it Sydney that didn't speak?
Yes, yeah. For me, I definitely didn't experience such like major misogyny and homophobia, especially not from my family. But I did experience enough, and I think it's interesting how even though I didn't experience anything quite so traumatic as Carol and Rachel did, I still ended up in the same place. And I think that says a lot how, especially as we came out of the 90s, from what I can tell, how it's become even harder to be a non-conforming woman in society. I know when I was growing up, I did not see a single remotely non-feminine woman until I had gotten to high school. And there was a butch girl. And by then I had already transitioned, like no hope for me there. And when I was growing up, my parents were always okay with gay people. And now they are perfectly fine that I'm a lesbian. But while they would say they were okay with gay people, they would be disturbed somewhat by nonconformity. And in a large portion of it was from, in a way, trying to protect me from how society treats non-conforming women. But the problem is I was a kid and I didn't understand that they were trying to protect me. I just understood that they didn't like me, and they didn't like, even though at the time I was in complete denial about it, presumably the most extreme non-conforming thing you can do, which is be attracted to women. For me, I always thought that it was impossible for a woman to exist the way I do now. As it is right now, most people who see me think I'm male, and it's not even because I transitioned at one point, but it's because I just dress very comfortably and have an androgynous body. And I think about that now because before transition, I didn't think anyone could look the way I could. And I think if I hadn't transitioned and detransitioned, I would still think that. It would have been impossible for me to fully accept that everyone else perceiving me as male doesn't mean that I actually am. And I think that plays a large part into why formerly confident butch women or young girls growing up who were at one point confident or had supportive families still cave in, because it's just, there's nothing there for us. And I realized I was a lesbian sort of around 17. I was in complete denial before that, and I was also a child. But they don't really let you think about that. I basically was like, well, I'm kind of dysphoric about the idea of the female body, and I'm not really attracted to men, but I can't possibly be attracted to women. No, that couldn't possibly be a route. So I was just like, yeah, I'll just say I'm a gay man, because at the time, the thing is trans ideology really likes things that are called gay, but not actual homosexuality. And the reason I think they like this is because, one, they've turned it into some sort of weird sub counterculture, but also because that's kind of their political ticket in a way. They'll make appeals to nature to mimic the way that we point out that homosexuality is present in other animals, even though their appeal to nature has no basis. They'll point out that, oh, well, if you're uncomfortable with trans women in changing rooms, would you be uncomfortable with a lesbian? They bathe in this virulent homophobia while also touting to be so gay positive. And I think that also affected me significantly. And because I was getting the acceptance, but not acceptance from my family. And then when I would go online, I would get that acceptance, but not acceptance from everyone else. And it just was not in either place rejected or refuted at all. And if anyone did try to question it, they were labeled a TERF and socially ostracized, all of that. So you get 14-year-old me who's honestly really naive, and I was suicidal, and I was essentially told that the way I was fundamentally male, and making that so would fix things. So I think all of that's wrapped up in severe misogyny and homophobia. There's not really, these are people who view being extremely non-conforming, not just not wearing makeup, but like to the point where like you just naturally, with how society is right now, pass as male, or you just naturally are very androgynous. These are people who view that as a sickness. And I think it's tough because even in radical feminist circles, some women will struggle to address that level of nonconformity without othering it in their mind. But I think we're making strides with that. It's tough because that's the exact thing that definitely pushed me to transition.
You know, I was thinking something you said there about not seeing any, or you were talking a little bit about even some of the butch women who've been out for a while and still fall into this. And that's something to me is very interesting, because here I was 34 years old transitioning. Like, what the hell? I should have been okay by then. And I'm not the only one. When I see so many butch women transitioning of all ages. I mean, when I went to my local support group, and I don't live in a huge city or anything, so small community, when I went to my local trans support group when I first started transitioning, there was mostly all butch women there. That's who was there, who was the trans men. There was a 50-year-old woman there, butch woman, who wanted to transition. So this really affects a huge, massive portion of lesbian society. And I think the reason we fall into it, even though we may have lived our lives so long as butch women, is because it's so hard. It's so hard to live that way. The daily ridicule, the daily struggle. Sometimes I think it just wreaks havoc on us, and we just can't do it anymore. And this just seems like such a perfect solution, such a perfect escape. It makes sense. The idea that there are really men in our minds and female in our body, it makes us feel like, I think that the world isn't actually as bad as it is, that it is just us, and we can change that. I mean, there's a lot of power in the idea that you can take control and change something.
You can change yourself, but not the world. And
yeah,
this lets you know that you can
too.
change yourself.
Yeah. And I mean, which in a way, and I won't lie, I agree with Sydney on this too. Transitioning did help. I did feel better. And that's kind of the thing people have to get, is it is helpful, but it's not helpful for the reasons people are saying it's helpful. It was helpful for me because it enabled me to hide and enabled me to pass as male, which alleviated all that stress and all that pressure off me as a butch woman in society. I got more respect. I got better jobs. I mean, it was just easier that way. So.
Well, and I think too, there's this interesting thing that the trans community has done, where they've made being transgender so protected in society, that if you are walking around as a masculinized woman, if you say I'm trans male, or I'm, FTM, or whatever words you use, people will recognize that and be like, oh, I gotta watch what I do. But if you say, no, I'm a woman, and you look masculinized, then people say, oh, cool, I can be misogynistic around you. I can treat you like garbage. Mm-hmm. And it's just, it's ridiculous that it does give you this sort of shield to walk amongst the world, in a way that you're more comfortable in how you present. But you have to go through so much self-sacrifice in order to do that. And you can't just say that you are a woman doing that, and still retain that shield. And I will say, transitioning, benefited me in the sense that before I transitioned, I was very invested in being hyper feminine and putting, like I said, you know, like I tried very hard to be heterosexual. I tried very hard to fit into all the roles. I tried, you know, to look the part and be the part, and it didn't work. So when I transitioned, even though that also was not the right way to go, that was very self-sacrificial and very harming to myself. It did give me the liberty to feel comfortable in having my hair short and wearing clothes that I like and walking the way that I want to walk and being with women. And it gave me this sort of confidence that I think I still carry now, where I am able to say, no, I can still be a woman and enjoy these things and present this way and like what I like. And so it's just the part of having to change yourself that I think is the really insidious thing.
Mhm.
I have a story that's a little bit relevant here. We were talking all about how transition really does benefit you socially, but all of us are in America here. But I have a friend who is from South Asia, and there it was literally her only option. It was transition, or you're going to have severe issues. And as soon as she moved over to a Western country, she was able to detransition. But even now, since she's also really, really non-conforming, it adds in the layer of, since she's not white, there's a stigma of her being savage because she's not conforming to femininity. And it makes me want to chew glass the fact that in her home country, it was so horrible to push her to that. But even here, where things are not quite as bad, it's still very stigmatizing and very, it traps you in this, because if you want any freedom at all, you can just capitulate, right? You can just give into it. But the mental cage that forms, I think, is understated. And I think transition provides this really beautiful denial you can place yourself in. And it's tough because some of us are able to give that up, and hopefully many, many more of us will, but there's only so much you can do within your context.
It's probably another reason why so many lesbians and women in general have started to identify as non-binary. Like Rachel was saying, how it gives you that special shield. Non-binary gives you a shield.
Oh, for sure.
So
Even if you're like hyper feminine, it lets you not think about why you're hyper feminine, because you're not a woman. So you're not a woman being forced to do this. You're just a non-binary person who chooses to do it. It's the ultimate like choice feminism. It's denial at its purest form, because
Yeah.
that's safe and that feels better.
Very interesting. So, do people have questions? I guess you could try the hand.
I did. I have a question.
Okay.
I don't have a hand on my computer. I can't find that hand, so I can't raise it. Sydney mentioned the danger of being a college student. Can you please talk about that? What that's like, and what you mean by danger, and what you think can be done to solve that?
So I'm over in the STEM field. I was initially thinking about this, going to actually share my major, but then I realized.
Can't hear.
Hello?
I can hear you.
Okay. I was initially going to share my major, but then I realized I'm probably the only detransitioned lesbian with this major who talks about it all the time, but STEM field. So I'm not even near the like lib arts, where this is a really, really insidious problem throughout their entire major. Like, but even on my side of things, it's still the faculty is kind of forced to do it because it's university policy. There was a diversity initiative for my school within my university, and it was pushed by some random faculty and a woman with they them pronouns, and it was all about how like, oh, share the things you've experienced. But I know if I share anything, I am the only detransitioner. I cannot speak up about it without everyone knowing who I am. And if they know who I am, it kills your career prospects, especially if you're planning on doing future studying. If you're in the lib arts area, you're screwed. I have a friend who's in a kind of public facing industry in that, and she can't socially detransition because it'd literally kill her entire career. Like she wants to, she can't. It's not a question of like, could I do this for a feminist purpose? It would literally jeopardize her entire like life. And that's what really freaks me out. And while I'll talk with people one-on-one or in things that won't be recorded, I just can't trust having a trail that leads back to me. Because the danger of, even if I planned on moving countries from university to university, there's a trail and there's an inherent bias against you if you question these things.
The label of transphobia is it's a powerful one, and no one has to have any proof to say it. They just throw it out there, and then you're screwed.
Yeah. So when I first started detransitioning, I was like heavily involved in the trans community for a while. Like I was running groups and all sorts of stuff. And when I told people that I was detransitioning, I told them it was for medical reasons, because at first it was. And they lashed out quick. My best friend at the time, who was a trans woman, blocked me on all social media, and then apparently put out a hit on me. She put out my work address, she put out my home address, and she put out the address for where I was getting therapy. And she told people like if she ever found me, she was going to beat me. And I'm sorry, I'm using she, her pronouns for this person. I don't know why. Brainwashing. But anyway, so this person put out this hit on me. And so for a while there, I was legitimately scared. This person even apparently showed up at my work. Fortunately, I wasn't there that day, but I got a call from my work and they were like, hey, this person is here and they seem pissed and they're looking for you. And it was scary. It was really scary for a while. And I dropped out of any social circle for a while because I was like, I can't risk anything like happening to me. Like, you know, far be it from like, I wasn't in a career field I cared about. So it was like, I don't care if I lose my job. I don't care if I like have to move, but I care about my life. I care about the risk that this is posing to my life. And it sounds like an exaggeration to some people, but really like these people, they hold it so close to themselves that this is a purpose that they need to fight or die for, that they will do just that. They will fight or die to prove that you are an evil Nazi transphobe. And by, you know, showing violence against these transphobic people, they are proving to their communities how their loyalty is worthwhile, you know?
Wow. So I think Fran had a hand up or something. Did I see that right? Fran?
Okay, I just unmuted. Yeah. First of all, it's incredibly courageous and wonderful that all three of the women speaking tonight are coming out with their stories. And even though I'm not in their position and haven't been even as a lesbian, because I have a feminist radio show, I am very, very afraid that my views will become public. And I haven't had Anne on, and I'm very gingerly exploring this, but always with lots of ability to back out and say I'm just a reporter covering things, etc. In other words, even those of us hit in the most mild way are in a vise or in a prison because of this total takeover of trans ideology of our culture, which is in every single conceivable shape. I did want to go back to something that Rachel said that really struck me, Rachel, when you talked about testosterone affecting your liver and your kidneys in such a way that was very toxic. And I was wondering if that is common if you've run into other people? Because that certainly should be an issue that's being put out there. Can you tell us any more about it?
Yeah. So the thing about cross-sex hormones in general, but in particular testosterone, synthetic testosterone in the female body, is there are no studies done. There is no research. It is used off-label, and we don't know how it's metabolized by each different female body, right? So I haven't met anyone that I know of yet who's had their liver or kidneys shut down from it. I do know people who've had issues with liver function in particular. I do know people who have developed PCOS and endometriosis, which I have also had endometriosis after taking years of testosterone. I know people who've had heart issues. I know one thing I didn't mention was I've had 3 mini strokes. I had 3 mini strokes by the age of 27. And I've known other women who have been on testosterone for a long time, and they also have had mini strokes or full strokes. It's just a matter of, like I said, we haven't done any research on it. This is entirely experimental. And it's something that the trans community, they view doing the research on these drugs as gatekeeping, right? And they view gatekeeping as bad. They don't view it as actually preventative of causing issues. I think gatekeeping is essential. I think it's important because even if an adult person chooses to go down this path, they cannot consent to something if they're not given all of the information about their health and long-term health consequences. I wasn't told that I would risk stroke. I wasn't told that I'm at a greater risk of heart attack. I was told I might lose some hair on my head and I'm going to grow a beard and my voice is going to change. So that's a priority for me, honestly, is the medical side of these things. Of, I personally, I don't want anyone to go down the path of transitioning. I think that it's just so complicated and there are so many issues with it. But that being said, if people are going to choose this, they deserve all of the knowledge and all of the correct medical research to back it up, to show them, hey, this is actually going to be okay for you, or hey, this could literally kill you. This could take 20 years off your life. Because as it stands now, I'm looking at probably having a stroke before I'm 50.
Wow. I just want to say that I hope there is some repository, some website, some place where people can at least accumulate these stories and these experiences, so that the pattern can be more easily seen. I've certainly run across the information that testosterone increases the amount of red blood cells, and a female body does not necessarily have the vascular structure for that, and that in itself is dangerous. I mean, yeah. So I'd like to know if anybody knows more information on this. It's certainly an issue of informed consent, lack of informed consent, and I hope it's acted on. It might even be the key to breaking the stranglehold of trans ideology.
So I want to jump in real quick too, because I think a lot of people don't know the common side effects of testosterone. Rachel's case is more on the extreme side, but obviously not completely unheard of. The most common things I've heard, and this has happened to every single woman who takes testosterone, this will happen. You will get vaginal atrophy. You will get uterine atrophy. This happens. This is just part of it goes. And when I started testosterone, I was kind of told about the vaginal atrophy, but they made it sound like it was just some dryness, not a big deal. Oh no, that is not what it is. I'm sure some of you probably know exactly what it is. It's very painful. It's a horrible thing to have. The other common things is, like I think Fran mentioned, the high red blood cell count. I had that, and I was my levels were just kept climbing, and I had a doctor tell me that I probably just needed to go give blood so that I could bring those back down. So yeah, the blood cell count, the atrophy, definitely after about 4 or 5 years, you probably need to have the uterus taken out because that stuff gets really painful. and it atrophies, it shrinks up, and it just causes a lot of issues. Other weird, so those are the most common side effects. The hair loss obviously is something that happens to all the women who take it. That's gonna happen if you're on it long enough. And for me, I had not only the high red blood cell count, but my cholesterol actually went up significantly. Before I started testosterone, all my levels were fine. Like, I was healthy. I actually became like, I had a healthier lifestyle after transitioning, like after starting to take testosterone, but my cholesterol kept climbing. Every 6 months I had a blood test, that cholesterol went up. My blood glucose was going up. By the end of 4 years, all of those marks were at the point where I needed to start taking medication for them. And I stopped testosterone. 3 months after stopping testosterone, I went and got blood work. Everything dropped back down that quickly. I was surprised. It was really taken back, and it made me think, if it's having that radical of an effect on someone who's relatively like really healthy and not doing any, like, not smoking or drinking or any of those kind of things, and it's as simple as just going off the testosterone for all that stuff to go back down, that is some malpractice shit right there. The doctors are not telling you any of this.
I'd like to share a bit.
Yeah.
Carol and Rachel, you kind of already know my story. I'm probably going to get into it because we got right into the medical malpractice and the informed consent versus not. But first I wanted to mention, Rachel mentioned we don't know how it metabolizes in people's bodies issue. And there's like an average dose that they'll give to people. When I was on that dose, I ended up with a hormone imbalance that gave me the testosterone 2 times the amount of a grown man. And it made it so I couldn't eat, sleep, and I wanted to kill myself. And you want to know what changed it? We took the same amount monthly and split it from bi-weekly to weekly. And that shifted everything. Now, I was lucky enough to have an endocrinologist I was working with who at least had enough experience to be like, maybe this would work. All of the informed consent people are not having anyone like remotely trained do this. But I also want to say my endocrinologist was kind of shit too, because here's the thing. I was 14 when I started testosterone. My mom did her best to do research, but like Rachel and Carol said, there is no research. And what is said is very minimal. If you try to say anything else negative about testosterone, it's shoved down as much as possible. You're positioned as being transphobic because you're trying to jeopardize people getting the medication. I transitioned, I had that hormone imbalance. And then later, we found out that my family has a history of hypothyroidism on both sides. And you would think at that moment, my trained endocrinologist would go, hey, maybe we should take a second and stop and look at your thyroid and maybe consider going off testosterone because it's likely stressing your endocrine system. This conversation did not happen. It was my mom who pushed for us to even monitor my thyroid at all. As soon as I detransitioned, it pretty much gave out. I don't know if it would have happened if I stayed on testosterone or not, but regardless, continuing on because it just gets worse. When I finally intended to detransition, I first had one last appointment with my endocrinologist, and he acted very friendly about it. I had been like a model patient. I was the ideal child transitioner, really. Perfect dysphoria, perfect happy life after transition, radical change, perfect for his resume, you know? So he acted very friendly. He was even like, oh yeah, you know, I've been doing this for 20 odd years. I've seen some detransitioners. And I was like, how come you never mentioned that? And he was like, well, there's just not enough to really get in a study, you know, it's difficult. And yeah, it is, because many detransitioners refuse to go back to the medical services that hurt them. But I go off of that. And at the end, he's like, no, I'd like for you to wait 6 months to go off of testosterone just to see that that's what you really want. And now for context, when I was going on testosterone, he had this waiting period for 6 months that he would normally require minor patients to have. However, I had been decidedly trans for 6 months prior to seeing him. So he was like, all right, we'll waive it. And he started me on a low dose, to be fair, I think to give me a little time to back out. But as soon as I didn't, it was all holds off, you know? So since I'm detransitioning, got to make sure we wait to know it's actually what I want. Even though I wasn't even socially detransitioning, I was just testing out medical. But I eventually have to go back to get a letter so then I can change my sex legally back to female. And I go then, and an absolute storm happens because at the very start, I go, hey, is there any side effects I should look for long-term that could result from me having taken testosterone? I just wanted to know what to look out for. Instead, I got told there's literally nothing. There is no effects of taking testosterone. Now, then he immediately went on a rant about how taking vitamin D supplements can stress your adrenals. And I was getting a little frustrated. So I looked at him and said, so vitamin D can cause problems with your immune system, but not testosterone? And this man looked at me. I was 18 and he had been seeing me since I was 14. And he looked at me and said, you chose this. He said, you chose this, and that there's no effects from testosterone, and then went on to call me a psych patient and imply that I'd be routinely transitioning and detransitioning through the rest of my life. Well, that was insulting. And thankfully, I got my letter and never went back. But I just want to point out, this was the pinnacle of trans healthcare. This was a man who's been doing it for over 20 years, started out in San Francisco. And he's the peak. That's the care I got as a minor going to an endocrinologist. Let's think about the fact that they're trying to make informed consent not just a thing for adults, but for everyone. It shouldn't be for adults because we can't have informed consent for a treatment we have no research on. And when we say no research, to clarify, there's some research, but it's very, very badly done. And it's not really, it's just very bad. I don't know how to explain it without showing you and going through the study and pointing out all of the flaws, but they tend to be biased from the start. The sample size is horrible. It's a biased sample. There's all sorts of stuff. And then you get into the fact that all of this is funded and talked about by people who benefit from this, cosmetic surgeons, child endocrinologists, all of that. So when we talk about medical malpractice being inherent to transition, I think about myself and the fact that I had the best possible experience someone could expect. And it was that.
So we have a couple of other people who've raised their little blue hands. And one of them is Terry. You still there?
Yeah, I am. Hi, everybody. I'm in Florida, just to let you know.
Hi, Terry.
I've been on a few of these with you ladies, and I have to tell you that I find that each time I get a little bit more surprised and depressed at the sad state of feminism. I'm from an older age, more could be your mothers of these women who have gone through this terrible experience. But I want to say that I was back in Michigan on the 5th Women's Michigan. I was a kid. And when I hear these stories, it's as if feminism never even existed. Gay liberation didn't even happen. I am in a state of disbelief, actually, at this point, at some of the things I've heard, because in those days, women would go around with natural beards, for heaven's sakes, and proudly. I mean, granted, it was a little, unexpected then, and it was in a safe environment. But nevertheless, I would have thought we would have come further. So I have a question for the older lesbians, feminists among us, because maybe they can answer when and how it ran off the rails. I have my own opinions. I'm going to delay saying them. Well, I think we just allied ourselves with liberal politics rather than being pure feminists. In any event, that's a whole nother issue, because at this point in time, I believe that feminism has become a willing collaborator with trans ideology, an ideology that basically threatens our existential existence, that is misogynistic, homophobic, illiberal to the degree that would put McCarthyism to shame at this point, and it's anti-science. So I'd like to know from the older ladies, where the hell did it go wrong and why? Thank you.
I can pipe in, though somebody else is here wants to talk, and then Hank is next. So it looks like there's Hank and Tina, but let me just say really briefly, because they could probably, at least Tina can answer it, is that we lost our movement in our community. There was a tremendous backlash against feminism and the lesbian community that we had that supported women for being lesbians, for being gender non-conforming lesbians, as we all pretty much were and are. That just got destroyed, and there's a lot of forces in society that did that. But if I know if I was growing up now, I probably would end up transitioning. I would have, as a kid even, I would have. So that's a really scary thing. So let me just, I don't want to hog this. So I have Hanka and Tina. So Hanka's next, and then Sandra after that. But it's be Hanka.
Hi, everyone. So my question would be, the speakers, you said that yourself, started as butch lesbians, then went into it. I believe when you were in the, transition period, you did believe in it, right? So my question would be, what's the, what were the moments that made you, realize it's bullshit? Because I wonder how to speak with women like that who are thinking that they're men and they were butch lesbians. So that's my question, how to talk with this type of women, what worked for you to realize it's all bullshit and whatnot.
For me, I actually questioned all of this as part of a research project in high school. Kind of ties back into what everyone was just talking about. I had decided to research the Stonewall myth. At the time, I wholeheartedly believed in it, but I was required by my project to look for primary sources and secondary sources close to the event, so actual historical references. And what I found was completely different from everything I had been told, and that really kind of broke the ground I had been standing on. And while it didn't lead to me questioning my own transition and transition in general at the time, but it really opened me up to how historical revisionism is really, really common with the trans movement, and how things were not always this way, and that they lie. That was, for me, probably the biggest moment, even if it didn't directly lead to it.
I think from what I've encountered with most detransitioned women is we are ironically really interested and based in facts and driven by learning more. And so we've been told by the trans community, here are the facts and here are our cherry picked statistics and such. And so that's a part of what I think keeps us in it is, we have these things that we can base our beliefs on, and we can hold it up to criticism. But that gets shaken when we see controversial things. So for me, a big thing was actually there was an article in the newspaper The Stranger by Katie Herzog about detransitioners. And when I started telling my transgender friends at the time that I was detransitioning, they're like, okay, but whatever you do, don't read this article. Don't read this article about detransitioners. And instantly I knew I had to read it. So I went and I read it. And when I read it, I was seeing these stories of these women who had been through this process that I had been through. And I saw their analysis of it and what they had experienced in that process and learned about themselves. And that really struck home to me. And I started to think, well, okay, the trans community really doesn't want me to learn more about this. So that means I should probably learn more about it. So the rebel in me kind of fought back and wanted to get more information. And I think having information presented to me in a way of just, here's our opinion, and then here's facts, and then, here's history, instead of, a direct, you're wrong and I am against you. It wasn't controversial to me as a person. It was controversial to the beliefs that I had adopted because I had been coerced by this community. And I really, I may get flack for this, but I will die on this hill that the trans community as a whole, obviously not every individual, but as a whole, is a cult. It works in the same system as a cult. It uses brainwashing. It definitely entraps people. And so to get people out of that is really challenging. And I think looking at deprogramming people as though you are deprogramming them from a cult is really integral. And being able to view the person beyond the beliefs is also really important too. Don't, even if this person is speaking on behalf of TRAs and on the trans community and such, and spewing just utter nonsense, try to find the person inside and reach to that person instead of trying to knock down the whole community.
Can I add to that before Carol goes on? I'm sorry.
Okay.
So if you could point out, like you said, try to speak directly to the beliefs instead of community and whatnot. I would just wanted to add from my personal experience that trans identified females are the most aggressive ones against when I share the things about the history or just in general about gender critical things. They're the most aggressive people. Why do you think is that? And do you think when speaking with these type of women, is it gonna even go through them, or that they hate me so much? I feel that nothing I say it's gonna matter. Anyway, so how to go around that? Is there a way?
Sorry.
Can I jump in just for past stuff? Number one, Carol hit on stuff I watched in myself too. As Anne said, if I had grown up now, I'd be trans. That the gender non-conforming piece, I am not a woman, I'm a person, was something I thought when I was 8. In the larger picture though, it's not, it didn't start with trans. It started with, one more experience. My ex-lover transitioned because she couldn't work as a carpenter and be a woman. She wanted to be part of us, the boys, which shocked me when I figured it out. The larger picture, there's a great essay by Alex Dobkin who said, when it went from women's studies to gender studies, we can't be mean to the men. We can't leave anybody out. We can't center women because that would just be too exclusive. That it was there, it was in the change from some kind of material analysis of society to postmodernism. We all have many truths. There's not just one truth, there's many truths. And the dismantling of the women's liberation movement as a movement for self-determination, the same way every other progressive movement was attacked. This is this internal turning inwards, this I can't change society, I have to change myself is I think one of the most important pieces and the most tragic. I'm going to step back because when we talk about how to talk to individual people, I think in some ways that's the biggest discussion. We need to track the history and write the history and write down the facts so that people know them. No, I'm assuming the Stonewall myth you meant, Sydney, it was started by Black trans women. Hello. And you wrote this wonderful essay about, I can't remember her name, who the Black butch lesbian that started Stonewall. But I think it's really important to place it. The cult evolved in this wacky place, but it's part of a much larger pushback for self-determination for women as a whole and lesbians in particular. Okay.
Can I just ask people to wait? It's great, Tina, but I'm trying, it's really a little bit challenging to do this when it's not in person. So Lynette has been waiting patiently. So I would give Lynette the floor right now, and then we can have our panelists talk about this stuff. So Lynette.
Thank you, Ann. Hi, Rachel, Carol, Sydney. I'm an older butch lesbian. You're going to be all right. Don't worry about this whole thing. It's great. And you're beautiful. Don't worry about it. You know, butches rule. Come on, step up here, girls. I'm a spokesperson for LGB Alliance USA. And the reason I'm a spokesperson is because I'm an older butch lesbian. And so I can't get fired from retirement. They can't take my Medicare away. I can't be hurt. But let me just tell you something. I'm not who LGBA USA is. We have a whole cadre of young lesbians, gay men, bisexuals in our leadership. If you go to our website, you can see who we are. We just got a new website up. So we're out there, and what we are doing is standing firm for LGB rights. And one of the reasons as a rad femme lesbian that I got involved is because we need greater forces to fight back against this. And that involves getting gay men involved and bisexuals involved, because our organization stands for sex-based rights, same-sex rights. We formed a coalition with Ann's group, Feminists in Struggle, and also the Georgia Green Party recently, COFA, and wrote letters to all the senators to give them the straight shot on what was wrong with the so-called Equality Act. And that is, you just simply can't do a search and replace and put gender in the place of sex. So our organization we're fired up. As I'm sitting here on this call, I'm getting notes from our Discord from everybody busily doing things today. And what we're doing is trying to establish local connections for lesbians, for detransitioners. We particularly want to provide a platform for detransitioners. So we're reaching out, and we want to get people across the country involved in local groups to help us organize. So if you're interested, go to our website. There's a contact form there. Shoot us an email. We're happy to talk to you. But one other thing I just want to mention briefly, and that is you should all be aware there's an interesting legal case going on in Arizona in which two underage women are trying to get Medicaid to pay for a double mastectomy. And who represents these two young women? Well, golly, it's the National Center for Lesbian Rights. Who knew? So anyway, so don't put your lesbian money with organizations that don't represent lesbian rights, even though they say they are. And you've talked about history of these things, and you have to go back and look at the history of HRC and how they're behind this whole trans thing and the big money behind it. But I want you to know about this Arizona case. It's significant because a group called SEGM, S-E-G-M, filed an amicus brief in that case. What's significant about SEMA and the amicus brief is very simply this. That brief is dynamite because it is filled with good research. It rebuts all of this crap that the National Center for Lesbian Rights alleges in the complaint about why these two underage women should have their breasts removed. And so it's the first significant time that there has been good research done and presented. They also are fighting back against WPATH, which is are kind of the real boogeyman in the whole thing, that their science is just fake science. One of the people signing on the amicus brief is Kira Bell. So it's a big pushback in this case. It's significant. So I have the briefs. I have all of the stuff. I just had an interview yesterday with 4W, and I sent them all the stuff because, hey, they might want to publish it. I don't know. So anybody interested in this brief, I'm happy. You can contact me through LGB Alliance. I'm happy to send you copies of all the complaints, of all the material. You should know what you should know what the National Center for Lesbian Rights is doing. And you should know what all these organizations are doing. You should you should shine the light on these people. I got mad at this whole thing when Mishfest was shut down, when there was a huge boycott of this women's organization. Never in our history have LGBT organizations organized boycotts against lesbians, have financially impacted lesbian businesses. Not only did they boycott the festival, they boycotted every musician that played there. They boycotted everybody who had played there. They boycotted all of the vendors. These are women who did crafts and came to Michigan to make some money, and they were now boycotted by LGB in places and institutions. It is a mind screw for this whole thing. I said screw rather than the other one, because even though I'm butch, I do tone down occasionally. So I think that what you need to know is that there are those of us stepping up, and we are doing things, and we are pushing back. But we need everybody to pick something up here. Join FIST, join us, join anybody you can, reach out to local groups and get involved. And we've got your back. We're there. And a lot of us old butch lesbians you see on this panel, we've all been where you are, and we've been hurt. Bad things have been said about us. The family doesn't like us. We've lost jobs. We've lost apartments, but we made it through. I mean, I did. I'm 73 years old and I'm still spinning out there. So I think you got to look ahead. This is just a bump in the road. You're all going to be okay. But I really, really appreciate you showing up here today and telling your stories. It helps all of us to get a clearer picture about it. And if any of you are interested in filing malpractice lawsuits, I'm also working with a group that are looking for detransitioners to file lawsuits. So if you're interested and you know other detransitioners that have suffered, let me know, and we'll see if we can't find some lawyers to take on these malpractice cases. Lawyers are going to have to step up, and they will once they see the money. I'm a retired attorney. I did malpractice myself. So it's just money. And if they see the money, they'll jump in like sharks on red meat. So we just have to show the damages. We have to get people who will stand up to be plaintiffs in these cases, and we'll get some backing for you. And I'm sorry for taking so much time. Thank you, Anne, for having me today and letting me talk. And thank all of you. Take care.
Great
Bye-bye.
group. So anyone else who wants to speak or have questions, or do we want some response? Why don't we get some response from the panelists?
Well, I kind of forgot what questions were being asked. I think Henke was asking about how you talk to people, and in my experience, you can't convince them. If they're in that mindset, they're in that mindset. I mean, what Rachel brought up is like spot on with the cult stuff. If you really want to, if you have someone that's you're closer to in your life, you want to reach them and they're in this ideology, do some reading into how to kind of help people, how like programming works and cult deprogramming works. I don't remember the name of the book, maybe Rachel does, of Steve Hassan. What was that? You're muted.
Give me 2 shakes. I'm actually looking up one book that I need to recommend about cults and how to get people out, but then I'll also get Steve Hassan's, which FYI, I've talked to him, and he won't officially state that it's a cult, but it's a cult.
Yeah, but but yeah, I really think the whole deprogramming cult stuff is really the route you kind of need to get into to reach people, because even if you have the facts, they're not good. That is not going to matter. These people aren't about facts. If they were, they wouldn't be in this position in the first place. So that's my wife. My wife went totally radical feminist about 6 months into my transition, which was really interesting. And the way that she started to kind of work to kind of bring me out of that once she realized, oh, this is a fucking cult and this is a problem, was to follow those kind of deprogramming guidelines, which was to every once in a while introduce a little count, like a little, oh, maybe what if kind of thing, not like, well, that's wrong and here's the facts, but really just planting a little seed that would just kind of sit there and and just tickle in your head a little bit. That's what you have to do, and it's a slow, tedious process, but I mean, it can be done. Don't give up.
I want to share a little on this. I mostly talk to people online, and my philosophy on it is, one, that you need to have incredible patience, and two, that nearly 100% of the time, the person you're talking directly to is just going to shut down. But the people watching you talk, the people who might find your conversation later, almost everyone who questions it does not do it in a conversation they're having. It's when they're reading something else and they can to themselves have those doubts. So I think remembering and having that patience is really important. Another thing is that minors really need to be handled very carefully, because you take all of the irrationality of a cult member and put that in a child, and it's a lot. I see a lot of people who are parents always being like, what can we do? What can we do? And their goal is to get their child not to identify as trans. But the problem is if you go in with that goal, it's very, very easily, they're literally being told that if your parents don't immediately affirm you in your decision, that they're transphobic and are therefore evil and hate you and want you dead. And they believe this, even if you've been very loving, because like Carol and Rachel have mentioned, it's a cult and they're minors. So the best thing someone can do, I think, really is, yeah, sure, maybe affirms their social idea of what they want to be. Definitely let them do whatever they want by like dressing or getting haircuts, because you should be doing that anyway, letting them be non-conforming. Another thing is try and get them to be a little more active. I think most detransitioners have mentioned that really actually using our body instead of sitting in it and hating it helps, but it's also kind of hard to push us to do that, especially kids, because they're like, oh no, family camping trip, that's the worst. But stuff like that, sort of indirectly, it'll definitely be a problem when you say no medical transition, because they will not be happy, but that's an easier barrier to overcome than saying no transition at all. And sometimes you got to work on their level, especially with minors, because they've internalized that this idea of who they are involves this. And like I said earlier, when I was transitioned, when people critique that, they view that as critiquing them, and even more so than adults. There's just only so much you can do to work with minors, and most of it is just providing a relatively safe place for them to explore that notion and trying to drag them out of depression as gently as you can. So I think when we're talking about how to talk with adults and whatnot, I think that's a really, really important discussion, but also remember that kids are different.
Totally.
Anything else on the panel?
Nope. Got more questions?
Any more questions?
We're happy to answer.
Yeah, I have a question.
Am I missing anything? Just pipe in, because I'm looking, and it's harder to do it this way than it is in person.
Sandra? Does Sandra have?
Yeah, I think so. She might have.
Hi, I'm one of the old radical feminists from the 70s, and I think I'm beginning to believe that the most radical actions that we did at that time was to challenge gender stereotypes. And given the backlash against stereotypes since then, I'm beginning to believe that more and more. All of this, we firmly believed in the 70s that whatever a woman does is what a woman does. So however women dress is how they dress. You know, it was very simple, that people should be who they are and not be discriminated against for that. That has been turned into rigid gender stereotypes, all kinds of insanity. If there are no sexes, then why do you have to transition? There's, the whole thing is absurd, which of course is fine in a cult. But this talk or this panel of Rachel, Carol, and Sydney has brought the mother bear out in me. And so I want you to take good care of yourselves and be taken good care of. And you have allies, you have very strong allies in gender critical groups, in LGB alliances, in lesbian alliances. And I would urge you, you're active, but I would urge everyone in your transition community to start joining us to fight back, because resisting and fighting back is one of the most healthy and therapeutic things that you can do for yourself. Thank you.
I found that to be true.
Let me just say that to me, I think that's absolutely right, that the key is going to be to rebuild feminist movements and LGBT movements that were hijacked or disappeared, or both. I think that's really going to be key. And Feminists in Struggle is trying to help rebuild a radical feminist women's liberation movement. And we got the LGBT Alliance doing an incredible job trying to rebuild a genuine lesbian and gay liberation movement. So I think that that's going to be key to create real change in society, and also provide the support people need to be different, to not have to conform or to have to change yourself, your body or yourself in order to be accepted. So I think that's important.
I was thinking something that's really important, I think, because Lynette brought up Mitch Fest and a lot of, the events that used to exist for women. I think that's so important that we work to bring some of those back. I know for me, especially when I began my detransition, I wanted more than anything to reconnect with women, and also reconnect with lesbian women. And in butch women too, like just, the closer I could get to what I wanted to connect with that. And there was nothing. There's nothing in my local community. It's disheartening. There wasn't even anything like, Mitch Fest would have been one of those things where I would have been like, oh, hell, I'm going, and it probably would have been very helpful to go and be around so many women who look all kinds of different ways and not feel out of place. So I think that's so important that we rebuild some of those communities.
I can definitely attest for how those spaces help, because around my college town, there's some lesbian lands, and seeing older lesbians who are just happy and existing and content with themselves is honestly one of the most healing things I had as I was going through detransition. Because I was in a very awkward state at first. I feel most detransitioners are, where you're not sure if you want to at least try and conform a little to get a little better treatment. But being able to see lesbians just exist was honestly one of the most healing things to have.
I went to Women's Land for the first time just about a year ago in the Pacific Northwest. And I honestly, I had to run back to my tent because I just started crying, because I've never had lesbian community before, and I've never seen women just being women. And it was so nourishing. And I just remember so vividly every time I would pass the women who lived there, who were there day to day. They would say, "Hello, woman," and it was awkward at first to hear that, but the more I heard it, the more it just reminded me, like, I'm a woman. That's fantastic. And they see me as a woman. They don't see me as a detransitioned woman. They don't see me as a, previously transgender person or anything like that. They see me as a woman. And that was also very healing to know that where I'm at now, even though I do feel othered in certain ways with my experiences, that I am still a woman.
So I think Fran had a question again. Fran?
Well, I had kind of a comment. Some people have been talking about, where did feminism kind of go off the rails, and I very much agree that is the question, and it needs to be really solved, and we need to work out of it. But I remember, and I often remember this, a actual popular children's book in the 70s, which was called Free to Be You and Me. And it had, the iconic, the boy who wants to be a ballet dancer and the girl who wants to play football, and this is all perfectly fine. So things by the late 70s had gotten so far that even liberal institutions, that was Letty Cotton Pogrebin of Ms. Magazine, which was very liberal and maybe even a whole sellout event of radical feminism. Anyway, things had gotten so far this was bubbling up in liberal circles. And I keep being so amazed that we could have gone backwards from there. And we have to point out that feminism explored this territory long before all these kids said, well, I don't want to be stereotyped as a boy or a girl, which is what they're saying again today, because that's what they're being offered. So we got to get it back to that point again. And I just applaud your work, Anne, and I applaud this whole thing that FIST is doing. Thanks.
Hi, Anne. Can I step in for a second?
Sure.
I think one of the things that is important to note too with everybody here is that what's happening now, talking about feminism, what's happening now is that a lot of the feminist and women's organizations from the 70s and 80s and 90s are now downsizing, and what we're seeing is archiving of materials taking place. So what young people, I think, should know is that all this information is being stored in vaults in universities across the country. Women's organizations are putting their materials, their letters, their correspondence, their photographs. Lady Slipper Music, and as disclosure, my wife is Lori Fuchs, who's over actively in chat. Lady Slipper Music has their material archived at Duke University and UNC, and the idea is to preserve that history of what that was, what the organization was, and what they did, to see the catalogs of music. That's one thing. And also, I think there's a big archive in Michigan going on, but women have put their papers all over the place. So there's research out there. Go find it. But I think the key thing that is missing for young people, young lesbians who don't quite know that they're lesbians, is what happened with us in the 70s is we had community and we found other lesbians. And, there's not a magic potion that we had in the 70s. It's all drunk up and there's no more of it. What happened was, for me, for example, I discovered a softball team. And I went to play softball, and lo and behold, all those women turned out eventually to be lesbians. And so you find women like that in weird places. You find lesbians. We had music festivals. And yes, there was music, but there were an awful lot of lesbians there, and they found each other, and they had relationships. Some of them were dysfunctional, but that's the way it is. But we found each other, and we found community with each other. And we had newsletters, and we had potlucks, and we had volleyball, and we played together. We played music together. We worked on projects together, and that's how we built our communities. There is not a blueprint out there, but if you look at some of the archives, you might find some blueprint material. But you need to understand that these businesses, these women's businesses, started with just a hope and a prayer, and that was about it, because they didn't have any money. So it's not like somebody came along and said, here's a whole bunch of money, all you women can go do your stuff, because they hated us. So it was just lesbians getting together. And I will tell you, there's a big secret you don't know yet, but when you get lesbians together, 2 or more, magic happens. It's true, because we are the most creative, determined people on the planet. So all you got to do is just find a group, keep looking, they're out there, find them locally. And if you can't find them, you start the group. You be the one. I tell young people in my group, nobody's coming to save us. We are the ones to save us. So we all have to pick up an end to this and do our best. But I appreciate everything that everybody in this group has done in the past and that you're doing in the future. And you girls are brave, as we say. And girls is, lovingly handed to you. Okay?
Thank you.
Hey, Rochelle would like to say something.
Okay.
Okay, sit down over here.
I just want to say something that would kind of second what Lynette said, but from a little different perspective, because I'm her age and I came out in the 80s. And I kind of stumbled into being a lesbian in a way, even though I had been thinking in that direction. But what happened, I was living in Boston and I saw this ad in this women's paper for a reading group, a women's reading group. So I go to this women's reading group and lo and behold, they were all lesbians. And I have to admit, it flipped me out at first. But then the more I went, because it was so fascinating, we were talking about lesbian feminism, which has been such a discredited philosophy, which is really, really a shame. It's really powerful and really, I can think it can speak to you if you could go in the archives and find writings from this, because it does smash stereotypes about what women are. It's whatever you like, whatever you do, that you're still a woman.
Mhm.
So the point I'm trying to make is that I came out not in, you know, the typical softball team, but with a little different thing, but they were still all lesbians. And that's what I mean. You could find women and lesbians in all walks of life and all kind of liking different things. I don't think that women should be pigeonholed and lesbians shouldn't be pigeonholed. It's whatever you are. It's an attraction that sometimes, you know, it's something I hadn't really been in touch with when I was a kid that I just discovered in my 30s. But when it happened, it was very, very powerful. I had more crushes on the women in this group than I never had in my whole life. So I just want to add that on to widen the kind of the dialogue. That's all.
Can I throw something out? I wanted to ask the women here who've had experiences with these lesbian groups in the past, how it was that you approached if there were men who were trying to invade those spaces, because I think that that's a big problem that we're facing now, is that if we advertise a space as lesbian only or women only, we get men coming in saying, I'm a lesbian or I'm a woman, you know, or we get women coming into lesbian spaces saying, I'm a lesbian because I'm dating a trans woman, you know. How do we, I guess,
that's a problem,
protect those spaces in a way, you know, that is defensible today?
Yeah, I think, but before anyone says anything, I just wanted to address, I wholeheartedly agree with what everyone just said, but I think a problem with finding lesbians now versus before is you can't find lesbians.
Right. Right.
They're all under different names. It's so hard to get people together because no one says they're a lesbian, or they're too scared to say they're a lesbian, or they're deep in the juice of the cult, the Kool-Aid, you know. And and I fully recognize that that does not mean that it was easy in your guys' time, because you had to deal with a very intense closet. But it's like it circled right back around to being practically speakeasy-esque.
Yes.
And
you want to say something?
that's something that's been really hard to surmount.
Rachel, the way that we handle the women only spaces here in my town is we have a local organizer who has been putting on women's events for the past at least 10 years. And she has an email list and it goes out to us, but we rent out spaces. And then it's word of mouth. It's sort of like back to 60s and 70s when, you know, it was Friends of Dorothy. And you just said, hey, I'm a friend of Dorothy. And you like got into these spaces where you have code words. But at Gay Pride this year, our women's dance was canceled by the organization because 2 years ago, we had a women's dance. We had the place secured. And of course, trans women came and tried to get in. And we were like, no, this is a private party. You're not allowed. It's female only, blah, blah, blah. So we weren't able to get the space this year. So I went to a Pride event on Friday night, and I went to actually the HRC table, and I said, do you know what's happening with the dance tomorrow night? They've sold all the tickets. 2 years ago, it was women's only, and now it's a queer dance. And he goes, oh, don't get me started on that. And I said, I'm just trying to find
where is the women's dance? And he goes, there's one happening tonight. It's out, you know, in the country at this hacienda. Let me get the address for you. And so a gay man actually gave me the information. It was so on the down low, I didn't even know, but that's what's happened. But we really have to build community, have a strong central organizer there who keeps the email list and keeps it on the down low until we build strong again and push against this. That's all.
So that might be a good tactic for us, although we're having to deal with the internet. So that's a whole kind of different situation too. But, you know, looking into some of the tactics that was used back in the day when you did have to be really undercover about stuff would probably be helpful with building community again.
Yeah, we had, I wanted to say, I helped form a lesbian feminist organization in the 80s and in San Francisco. And in those days, it was legitimate to have women only spaces. And there was some, you know, the transgender thing was very small. And so it didn't have that much of an impact. And we were able to talk about women only stuff. So we had an out front lesbian women only organization. And that lasted until the early 90s in San Francisco. I think we are forced to be somewhat underground. I think as we organize, we can be more out front. I'm in San Diego now, and before COVID, I was having salons in my living room that were women only. So that's, you know, I can kick anybody out of, we can kick anybody out of our house that we want. So that's what, another thing is to go back, you know, do some living room stuff. And then just start, you know, organizing and join the feminist groups, join Feminist Struggle, join the LGB Alliance, make those connections, start organizing chapters and salons and various things on the ground, because it's not enough to do things remote, to start creating organizations on the ground, you know, take it from there. But realize that we are semi-underground now, but I think we're going to start pushing out of that. All right, can I say?
I think Anne's completely 100% right. And, you know, back in the day, we did things on the down low. I went to a bar that was under a 7-Eleven. It was called the Clown's Inn, and you went in late at night, and, you know, it was risky to go to these places. So we haven't had this, you know, easy time. And there was always that controversy of allowing men into concerts. And there would be, you know, lesbians who said, let the men in. And then there would be all of us going, kick the men out, you know. So we went through the struggles, and so it hasn't been easy, and it won't be easy for you. But you can have stuff in your house. You can have a reading group in your house. There used to be quilting groups that didn't quilt, but you need to go back to the old consciousness raising groups. Right. You know, format. You can do anything in private. You can have a private party and keep out whoever you want to and invite whoever you want to. Start small, start in your area, have a potluck. You may not know what those are. They're called brunch these days, I think. But anyway, that is, everybody picked up something from the 7-Eleven and brought it. But do games. I don't know what game. We played softball, we had basketball, we had volleyball, a lot of contact sports. You know, do something that brings you together as a community, that you have fun, that you laugh, that you build that friendship, that connection. And you will, I guarantee you will make friends that when you are my age, you will remember those times you had, and you will remember the struggles you shared together. But find that community. It's up to you to build it. I can help you. And we at LGB Alliance USA are trying to reach out and help young lesbians and gay men find a community to bring them together, to give them strength. So just keep at it. Don't give up. That's the main thing. Don't give up. Keep going.
I have Terry and then Rochelle. Terry, it's our little hand.
Yeah, here I am. Thank you, Lynette. I want to tell you, it's your breath of fresh air and a joy. And I have indeed joined LGB this and that. And there's something called LGB News, started, I believe, in London. And I think there's a US version. So if you look around, you will find the beginnings of pushback. I think the high water mark in trans ideology may have just passed, either in London when they rejected self-identification, and right now in the US with the pushback on sports, men in sports. So I commend you and thank you very much. What I wanted to say was the idea about consciousness raising is brilliant. We did it then, we could do it again. It's private, it's powerful. Sisterhood is powerful. We need slogans and we need to take back language. It's important that we use the term sex, not gender, that we say LGB, not LGBTQIOS, which I've heard. To use our own pronouns. I use my pronouns. You can use yours, but I assure you, I will use mine, and they are normal ones, okay? Thirdly, then eventually, once you build friendships, you can go public with a little bit more noise. It's difficult at first. Be brave. Believe me, you will succeed, because this is a hill worth dying on. Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to have Rochelle's next. And then if anyone else wants to speak, we'll have a round with the speakers.
Okay, I just want to say I agree with what was just said by Terry, but I can also appreciate how hard it is for women to be lesbians now, in a way harder than I think we experienced before, in the sense that the very definition, this is the importance of language, has been taken away from us. You know, to say a trans woman, an intact male, is a woman and can be a lesbian. And as a lesbian, I'm told, well, you have to include that in your circle of intimates. How do you argue that? When you say no, then you're a transphobe. And I've seen this stuff online where these trans women said things that reminded me of what men used to say in the 60s. You're hung up, you have a vagina fetish, blah, 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 blah. So that is the difference, a big difference. I mean, it's not even the same language that's being spoken here. Being a lesbian is having relations. It's not just, okay, I understand most lesbians are, non-traditional women. That does go with the territory. But the essential part of being a lesbian is relating to other women in the way straight women don't. And that's where they're attacking you. And I've had this argument so much with trans people and their supporters that it got on my nerves. It did more than just get on my nerves. I was told I have no right to privacy. I have this, that. And I've been a lesbian for more than half of my life. And it just blew my mind. So I can appreciate how hard it is, for young women nowadays, or any women coming out, the struggles they have to face, especially when everything is so much online. And it's kind of hard to tell who people are online, let's be honest. So I just wanted to say that community is important. It's probably the most important thing that lesbians have, finding, as hard as it is. Anyway.
The other thing that I think we're having to battle against here too is that this ideology has infiltrated the gay and lesbian community so much that you will get lesbians who, I mean, they are in fact lesbians, but they are involved with drinking the Kool-Aid too, and they will sometimes try to infiltrate groups and then out everybody because they think that they're doing their due diligence to, not be a bigot. So,
right.
There's a lot of like the infighting you have to deal with too.
Yes, absolutely. So is there anybody else that has a question or a comment? We can maybe take one more.
Encountered that.
I'm not seeing anything. Speak up if you do, because I don't see it. Anybody? Okay.
Okay, this is Fran. Just quickly,
Okay.
I'm putting the basics of the feminist radio show that I do at WBAI Radio in New York City every week. I'm putting it in the chat. It is mild in terms of criticizing trans ideology. I admit that I could easily lose the show if I'm too out front about it, but I have had Ann on. I do approach these issues much more than media usually does, and when I do take phone calls, it would be very appreciated if women in the FIST milieu called in, because you can state these truths more clearly than I can as the host. So I'm hoping you'll pay attention to the show because it is a site where we can get some of the word out. I'm putting that in chat right now.
Okay, cool.
So I think we should go do a round of the speakers of our panel before we close out. If you want to say anything more. This has been an incredible discussion. Really, really appreciate it, and appreciate everyone here, and especially our three panelists. So Carol or Rachel?
I took a lot from this. Thank you for having us on and for interacting with us. Lynette, hearing you speak gives me a lot of hope, and I've been like holding back tears with a lot of what you've been saying because it's really hard. It's really hard, and it's really disappointing to have been told, you know, in my youth by the world that we were in this state of acceptance and that I could breathe easy as a lesbian when that's not the reality at all.
Yeah.
And I just gotta remind myself to keep up the fire, and we can start again, and you know, we can keep doing this.
Yeah, I really I appreciate being invited on here. I think I feel like there was some consciousness raising. I think I think it's helpful for us to hear from different generations. I think that's definitely something we should probably work on, is to, young people talk to the older people. Everybody's got to get together, and the women got to talk. But yeah, I definitely, as I'm 2 years out from beginning the detransition process. And I mean, I don't know, you stop T and that's it. I mean, I don't know what detransition, it's kind of weird, but 2 years out, I'm starting to kind of look, okay, what's my next step? Where do I go from here? And I really hope to be more active in feminism and women's movement, because I think that's how we push back more.
Sydney, do you want to say anything else?
Yeah, I just wanted to say that, especially since I'm so young. I mean, I'm probably the youngest or not one of the youngest people here. Seeing everyone, talking to everyone, it's something that prior to going to university, and this is not because of university, but because of the lesbians I was lucky enough to find around it. Prior to that, had never been something I'd been able to experience. And every time I do, I cherish it because it's genuinely so heartening to see people like Lynette. I was listening to you, and even just like your story, even your accent just made me happy as a Southern lesbian. Yeah, it just to see that people like me exist. They're happy and they're living, and that, I think it's tough to balance the secrecy we need with the visibility that will really help people. But I think we'll be able to make it work. And I believe in groups of women like this.
Hear, hear.
Yes, thank you very much. So I'm going to encourage everyone to join Feminists in Struggle, which is, we have a website, feministstruggle.org, and we encourage membership and people to be active. We want to start building local chapters, and we were planning to have a national conference, and maybe a while till we can have one because of COVID doesn't even want to go away completely, but that is still an aim. But I think meanwhile we can start making connections locally. If we get more people to join, we can actually start seeing some people face to face and having contact with people locally and in our state, so we can actually build organizations on the ground, real organizations. So that's what we want to do with that. I encourage everyone to join the LGBT Alliance, which is also a great group, and we can start having a visible community for young women who are unhappy with traditional roles, who are lesbians, who don't fit in, to realize that there's another option besides changing your body, that you can work together with other women and change society. So I think that's really the message, and I really appreciate the experiences and the honesty and openness that we experienced here today. Thank you so much for doing this. We do have, as I said, regular forums, and we hope to have the LGBT Alliance on. That's definitely in the plans as a special LGBT Alliance forum. We're going to have one, I believe, on academia, because that's a big issue, with all the censorship going on in academia. But yeah, so just get involved and make those connections, and really great to have you all here today.
Thank you so much.
Okay, all right. So I think we can, anybody have anything else to say before I shut it?